Hello and welcome back to Bookish. Today I wanted to do a book review of If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin. This is the second James Baldwin novel I've read, and if you watched any of my videos from last year, you know Go Tell It on the Mountain was one of my favorite books of 2018, and I was really happy to discover James Baldwin as a writer. I feel almost foolish saying that since, James Baldwin should have been someone I was familiar with long before last year, but for whatever reason I wasn't, and I can't tell you how glad I am to have finally found my way to his work, because I find it to be really amazing. So, If Beale Street Can Talk is a novel set in African American neighborhoods in New York City, amid crime and poverty and, kind of hopelessness and despair. It's the story of Tish and Fonnie, an young African-American couple. I believe Fonnie is 21 and Tish is 18 during the action of the story. The story is told from Tish's point of view in an almost interior monologue fashion with flashbacks frequently to tell the story. So Tish and Fonnie grew up more or less in the same neighborhood, were childhood friends. That childhood friendship grew into love. They fall in love, they enter into an emotional and physical relationship, and they plan on getting married, but their plans are interrupted when Fonnie is arrested on a falsified rape charge and is sent to jail awaiting trial. Their story is complicated by the fact that Tish finds out that she's pregnant after Fonnie's been arrested, and the action of the story focuses on, number one, Tish dealing with this pregnancy more or less alone, and her fear that Fonnie will be sent to prison. And then primarily it focuses on the efforts of Tish's family and Fonnie's father to free him from jail and to free him from the injustice of the American judicial system. James Baldwin was an African American writer and essayist whose books and essays dealt with the African American experience in the United States of America, primarily in the 1950s and 60s. If you want to hear someone speak powerfully, I think, about the African American condition, you should look up YouTube videos of James Baldwin speaking about that, because he was an incredibly powerful speaker, and he's an incredibly powerful writer. He's kind of my new favorite author right now, which may seem silly since I've only now read 2 of his books, but I just think that he was great, and the 2 books I've read have done nothing but impress me. So, If Beale Street Could Talk is a short novel. It's actually just under 200 pages, but it encapsulates so much, I think, of the African American experience in the 1950s and 60s that it's somewhat remarkable in its ability to convey so many different things. It conveys the struggles with poverty of inner city African American families and their difficulties in just kind of making ends meet, and their difficulties oftentimes in holding their family together. It displays the kind of institutionalized racism of the police, of the court system, of landlords, of, the entire system, which was designed apparently either intentionally or unintentionally to keep African Americans poor and isolated in their own neighborhoods, to use them only for the cheap labor that they could provide. The novel depicts the struggles of families to try to stay together and to avoid the pitfalls of addiction and crime and prostitution and unwanted pregnancy and violence and child and family abandonment. All that's in the novel as well. In addition, the novel, I think, fairly honestly and frankly depicts the fact that there were real divisions within the African American community, and that not all African American people necessarily got along with one another, and there was infighting, and there was jealousy, and there was judgment within the community. Baldwin doesn't pull any punches. While the main villains of the story are, a white policeman and the system in general, he is perfectly willing to spread judgment and blame on those within the African American community who, in some ways tried to lift themselves up by keeping other African Americans down. At the same time, he depicts the struggles of African Americans trying to lift one another up while keeping themselves afloat. And in just a few sentences and characters, he's able to really depict these really complex things. As was true in Go Tell on the Mountain, one of Baldwin's issues that he has, I think, is with the African American churches and the hypocrisy of the African American churches in and the people who attend them in the lives of African Americans living in the inner city and throughout the United States. This is a real issue with Baldwin, who, as a young man, thought of and was being pushed by his father to become a preacher, but eventually rebelled against that. Came out of the closet, more or less, at least to himself, as a gay man, and really rejected those teachings of that church. A big focus of the novel is the injustice of the American criminal justice system at every step, from the predisposition of the police to believe that African Americans were a criminal element, from the racism of the individual policeman, like the policeman who ends up sending Fonnie to jail, the racism of the prison system and how African American prisoners were treated differently, the racism of the court system and the difficulty of even Tish's family in finding a lawyer, a white lawyer, who they trusted to actually represent Fonnie and to really try to do his best to get him out of jail. The entire system, the Beale system, and how that worked against impoverished African Americans to keep large numbers of African Americans in jail who had not been convicted of crimes while they awaited trial, simply because they couldn't afford bail. By the way, this is a problem that still exists in New York City and in other major cities in the United States. I think the two main focuses of the book are on the importance of family and the willingness of family members to sacrifice essentially everything to stay together, to help one another, to, in some ways, just of a whole family to sacrifice themselves to preserve the hope that may be represented by one family member, Tish's family. When they find out she's pregnant, not only are they accepting of the fact that she is pregnant outside of wedlock, but they are incredibly supportive. They throw themselves into the effort. Her sister Ernestine, her mother Sharon, her father Joseph, along with Fonnie's father Frank, throw themselves into the effort of saving Fonnie, of doing everything they can, including committing criminal actions sometimes themselves, in an effort to pay for Fonnie's lawyer and to get him out of jail, and eventually maybe to be able to raise the bail money to let him out. It is an incredible story, the power of familial love in trying to support a family member in trouble and trying to keep the family together. But it also, I think, is primarily a testament to the power of love itself. Tish and Fonnie's relationship is amazingly rendered. Baldwin's ability to get inside the head of a young African American woman and to kind of, I think, depict the confusing rush and illogic and emotional power of romantic love is incredibly, well, it's just incredible. And it's so powerful. And you never doubt for a moment Tish's commitment to Fonnie or Fonnie's commitment to Tish, and how they work to help one another, and primarily how Tish works to help and save Fonnie. James Baldwin's writing style is just amazing, and it's really hard for me to describe. And I thought about trying to pick passages out to read to you, but I really think it's something you have to discover on your own. But I would describe his writing style as just raw power under incredibly tight control. That there's never a moment in which you don't feel the emotional pull, the love, the anger, the frustration of the African American experience in inner cities in the United States in the 1950s and 60s, which is when the story is set. You never lose touch with that. That is always present. and the emotional aspect of all the things I described about what the story is about or what the story involves is always present, but it's always kept under such tight control. Baldwin is a skilled writer. He never lets the emotion of anything, mar the text itself or the beauty of his sentences or his ability to construct paragraph and story. He is able to maintain control throughout. In addition, Baldwin's writing is incredibly frank and honest. He doesn't pull any punches. There are realistic depictions of sex, of violence, of racism, of addiction, of despair in this book. Of all the aspects that I've described in the story are rendered honestly, accurately. Only occasionally are things is the emotional content of a scene rendered in anything other than pretty stark, frank, straightforward prose. I'm so glad I decided to read If Beale Street Could Talk. For a moment I thought about not, because of the movie tie-in, and you can see on my copy there's a movie tie-in sticker affixed to the front, which is not always my favorite thing, but I'm so happy that I read this book. Baldwin is just a great writer, and I would encourage you to read If Beale Street Could Talk, or essentially anything by James Baldwin. Anyway, there's my review of If Beale Street Could Talk, so let me know what you think in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.